officially sanctioned views, as long as they keep it to themselves, he keeps it to himself, or to these circles like the érudit, the libertin érudit, and so on. So I think there's a certain consistency there, but it is a case of organized hypocrisy.
Is it organized hypocrisy or is it disorganized hypocrisy? I think that there are genuine tensions. In Hobbes's views here, from the beginning, he says his doctrine is that it is the sovereign who determines what the proper interpretation of the Bible is, for example. But yet, in part 3 of the Leviathan, he says, let me tell you what these passages really mean. And that there's, is this inconsistent? Well, certainly is apparently inconsistent. There's at very least a tension there. And in the same way he says, the sovereign has control over belief, and yet. Now, what one sentence that strikes me, and this is from chapter 18, which I read, he writes, for the actions of men proceed from their opinions, and in the well-governing of opinions consists the well-governing of men's actions in order to their peace and concord. There is no question there of in foro interno, you can believe what you'd like, but in the external, in foro externo, you have got to be in accord with what the sovereign says.
He does spell that out very carefully. And
Well, let me just continue for just a moment on this. His point here is, in chapter 18, that this is the justification for why it is that the sovereign has got to be in control of the universities, the schools, and so on, and how in the churches people should be taught to believe certain things. There is a way in which you can affect what people believe, and it's through education. And the person who controls the education will control the...
Well, that's right. Leviathan, as he says in Behemoth, is his manual for civic education.
Yes.
And it's the official view, but it's not necessarily the view with which Hobbes subscribes. He deepens it by the in foro interno and foro externo distinction.
Look, I think that there are sort of real tensions in the view, and I don't think that there's an easy resolution. And I think that he really is, I put the resolution perhaps, or what resolution there is, in a different place than Sharon did. Sharon puts it in different kinds of curiosity, some of which are good, some of which are bad. I put it more in the conclusions and the novelties, which, curiosity is a good thing, but the novel conclusions to which you come are subject to the approval of the sovereign. But that is in some tension with what it is he says about curiosity and the search after truth and earlier part. And I'm not sure that it is possible really to resolve them in a completely consistent and satisfying way, which for me is what makes Hobbes such a rich and interesting thinker, is he is not always careful to tie up all of the loose ends. But we can continue to talk about this.
Professoressa Ebbesmeyer.
This is also just a brief question to Daniel Garber, relating to the first part of your paper, where you related the talk of curiosity with the Novatores and contextualized it within the Reformation. And I was wondering if you would agree then that one should maybe extend this contextualization a little bit beyond this namely to Italian humanism, which was a movement which started prior to the Reformation, and in which we find already some of the elements you mentioned, that is the rejection of Aristotelian philosophy, well, in the sense primarily directed to his moral philosophy, and also the idea that, well, there is some news here that we want to promote. They called themselves the moderni, and they coined a positive notion of the moderni, which they related then back to antiquity and said, well, in between there was just scholasticism and this was bad. So the true moderni are the true antiqui. And so I was wondering if we shouldn't see these novatores then in this tradition, and this would also open up to see the novatores also in positive terms, because you said, well, they are so different, and what we can see is only a negative binding element, which is their disapproval of Aristotelian philosophy. But if we see them in the continuity of Italian humanism, we might also see that what is the binding concept here is their openness to experience as one thing, and another thing is their new evaluation of the utility of philosophy. And I think both things are also found in Hobbes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. This relates to, I think, the first thing that Patricia said, that I had meant to respond to that I didn't when she was relating it back to Cicero. Obviously, the problem with novelty goes back much, much further. Among the ancients, among the Romans, you can find it in Cicero, you can find it, all the way. And in the 14th century, there were a group that called themselves the Moderni. It's interesting, modernus was not a term that was used in the beginning of the 17th century, although at the end of the century, the debate between the ancients and the moderns did revive that term. And certainly, Italian humanism goes back, before the Reformation. And certainly is a factor. But but I'm actually making a specific historical claim here, which is that the question of novelty, and there it was, the idea of being a novator, became particularly important historically in this moment in the 16th century. And you can find it specifically in the religious debates. And you can find it at a particular moment, starting in the late 16 teens and early 1620s, being extended by the people who are involved in the religious debates to questions in natural philosophy. And look, there were people from the 13th century on who, as soon as Aristotle was revived in Latin Europe, who were offering opposing views. So the idea of being anti-Aristotelian was by no means new. I mean, you find it, in the 13th century, Aristotle condemned in Paris numerous times. And anti-Aristotelian views, particularly among the Italian humanists. But what's interesting is there was a moment in the late teens, 1620s, when there was a particular group of thinkers, and it was centered around the Italians. It was centered around, Talesio was identified as the father of modern philosophy, and Patrizzi, and Bruno, and Campanella. Sometimes they would bring in Cardano as well, were identified as the novatores and criticized in the same terms that people had used for religious things. And that's why I want to say that even though obviously there were the modernity before and there was anti-Aristotelianism before, something a little different was happening in the early 17th century, and it was specifically connected with the Reformation debate about novelty. Now, making a specific historical claim like that, I can be wrong. And it may be that, as a matter of fact, all of this stuff that I want to say is something specifically related to the religious debate that arises then in the early 17th century, actually goes back much further and is continuous, and there is nothing special about introducing the Reformation. But that's why it is that I concentrate on this particular period and these particular figures.
Jean-Charles.
Je pose ma question en français ou en anglais?
Oui, ça va.
Ça va. C'est une question, j'ai beaucoup apprécié l'articulation entre la critique de la nouveauté et la question de la curiosité. Enfin bon, hein. Ma question porte sur les rapports entre la curiosité et le thème de la libertas philosophandi. Parce que j'ai vu, en ce qui concerne Gassendi, une évolution. Il y a eu des moments successifs dans les rapports entre curiosité et libertas philosophandi. En gros, jusqu'en 1624, les dissertations en forme de paradoxe contre les aristotéliciens, etc., le thème de la libertas philosophandi est fondamental pour un novateur comme Gassendi. Et à l'intérieur de ce cadre, justement, il définit une science de type, disons, baconienne, expérimentale, etc., comme une forme d'ouverture et de curiosité de l'esprit salutaire, hein, indispensable, une hygiène, hein, en quelque sorte, de la pensée. Et puis, plus on avance dans le parcours de Gassendi, plus le thème de la libertas philosophandi se restreint ou devient secondaire, passe à l'arrière-plan. Et il y a même des moments, en particulier après la condamnation de Biteau et Declave par la faculté de théologie de Paris, où 1624, où le terme pour curiosité est utilisé. J'ai repris le texte de la condamnation et il dit « en ces temps où curiosité et nouveauté hein, », les deux sont ensemble,
ouais.
Sont des portes ouvertes pour les esprits rebelles. Voilà. Donc, curiosité apparaît en rapport avec nouveauté, mais justement comme un danger, hein, pour les novatores. À partir de ce moment-là, on va voir Gassendi renoncer à certaines formes de libertas philosophandi, ou en tout cas les restreindre considérablement. En particulier, l'utilisation du schéma de la disputatio pro et contra. Vous savez, mimer le pour et le contre, hein, comme il le fait dans les Exercitationes, pour explorer des possibilités, hein, que les aristotéliciens n'avaient pas vues ou qu'ils répriment dans les écoles. Hein. Usage expérimental du pro et contra, hein, qui sera utilisé par les libertins érudits, par certains des libertins érudits. Eh bien, lorsqu'il écrit La Vie de Péresque, il écrit un texte contre l'abus du pro et contra.
Contre quoi?
Contre l'abus de la disputatio pro et contra, comme entraînant l'esprit dans des voies curieuses qu'il ne maîtrise plus et qui sont dangereuses. Donc il y a une évolution en ce qui concerne son propre rapport à un des instruments formels, hein, de sa propre pratique de la libertas philosophandi. Hein, c'est mon hypothèse. Hein, il y a une évolution où la libertas philosophandi passe à l'arrière-plan. Est-ce que vous pensez que chez Hobbes, ce thème, il y a ce type d'évolution où finalement c'est un moment important, mais où ensuite il y a d'autres moments où ça passe au second plan en rapport avec cette question de la curiosité?
Puis-je prendre en anglais? Ça va? Okay, those are wonderful questions, and the event in 1624, I think, was a crucial event in many people. This is the quotation that I gave from Jean-Baptiste Moreau was exactly a pamphlet written against what happened. Was there were a group of novateurs who got up and made a public disputation in which they claimed to be able to refute Aristotle. And they were closed down by the Parliament of Paris. This happened in August 1624. And there were pamphlets written against them, one of them by Jean-Baptiste Moreau. There was also an official judgment of the Faculty of Theology against them, which emphasizes novelty. And I think also curiosity is mentioned. But it's novelty is what it is that they go over and over and over again. And it is, and Mersenne at that point is writing La Vérité de Science, which appears a year later. And in that La Vérité de Science, there is a wonderful passage where he says, if somebody is using even Euclid for purposes that will undermine faith, Euclid should be banned, or even the Bible should be banned. And of course, this is all in the context of debates about Protestantism, but novelty is very much the theme there, but it is the liberty of philosophizing. Now, Gassendi has just moved to Paris that year, 1624. He has also just published the Exercitationes against Aristotle. He doesn't get at all bothered. He does not get at all punished, though he does not publish the second volume. He has a second volume that he retains, and that's always seemed a bit of a mystery to me. And at that moment, of course, the discussion about the liberty of philosophizing does get changed, because you have an official judgment that people can now refer to again and again, and they do refer to it again and again, against the right for liberty of philosophizing. But now what is it? But you're right to say, I think, that something changes shortly afterwards. But where I would put it is in the politics at this point, because remember, in the same month that this happens, Richelieu becomes the prime minister. 1628 is it that La Rochelle is defeated. And at that point, the government, coming into this, there's a very unstable French government after the assassination of Henri IV. With Richelieu and then the defeat of the Protestants, things become much more stable, and it's at that point that you're also that I think that you're able, people, or at least some people, are able to speak out and are able to have freedom of philosophizing in a way that they weren't before. And it's ironically because of the reestablishment, in a way, of a kind of absolute monarchy and the stability in society that results from the absolute monarchy that enables that kind of transformation. But it's quite striking, the difference between the early 1640s. That's the time of Théophile de Viau as well, as in jail. And these people, the people who do the thing in 1624, are compared, with Théophile and the other sort of freethinkers that are going on in that way. But I think it was politics as much as anything that caused the change.
Due domande rapide mie. The first one to Dan. Going back to the Galileo's affair as it is seen by Hobbes, you correctly explained that almost everything depends on who is in charge to control or to suppress opinion, either the church or the civil authorities. But what happens in Hobbes' doctrine when ecclesiastical power and civil power are joined in the same authority?
Well, that's good as far as Hobbes is concerned. That's the way it should be. That the civil authority and the ecclesiastical authority should be joined into one. You think of the frontispiece of the Leviathan with the sword in one hand and the bishop's mitre in the other.
About the suppression of sciences. So
Well-
Hobbes would agree about Galileo's affair in the
He would-
Church of England.
He would have
Not
to.
in Catholic Church, but in Church of England, he would agree.
I think he would have to, yeah.
I'm not sure.
I think this is part of the tension. You know, on the one hand, he certainly agrees with Galileo and thinks that Galileo is right, and thinks that the church should not, or would think even that the civil authorities should not. But if the sovereign decides,
I'm not sure because
obligated.
there is another interpretation of the Galileo's affair, which is presented in De Motu Loco et Tempore. Of course, the context is different because it is a discussion with a Catholic priest, Thomas White, and he puts the affair in other terms. He asks him, what would you decide when you were pulled in different directions by different mares? He refers to a myth in the Odyssey, Ulysses pulled in different direction by different mares. And he sustains that, of course, he had to choose science, not religion. Scientific truth, not religious authority.
yeah, but in the Leviathan, I think he takes a different solution.
The Leviathan is a work published for a political audience, basically. Not a philosophical, theoretical work, but a work which is supposed to teach obedience,
Yeah.
basically. So
So
I
you
think
think-
that Hobbes was able to make a difference between different audiences and different kinds of writings.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting to find other discussions, if we could, because there are two possibilities. You know, one was 1643, the other was 1651. And it's possible that he's writing for different audiences, but holds the earlier opinion as his true opinion. On the other hand, it's also equally possible that he had changed his position between the 1 year and the other. How can you decide between the one and the other?
Potremmo discutere più avanti, perché ho una seconda domanda per Pierre-François. Tu as dit que la nouveauté, finalement, est refoulée du système de Spinoza, non? Dans une certaine manière. Donc, à la base du refoulement de la curiosité, il y a le fait plus fondamental, disons, que la nouveauté elle-même est refoulée d'une certaine manière. Mais même en considérant le niveau théologico-politique, pas le niveau spéculatif de philosophie théorique, mais le niveau de la politique et des relations entre la politique et la religion, il y a quand même une grande nouveauté qui arrive. Quand Moïse introduit la religion dans l'État, c'est un tournant, c'est quelque chose qui renouvelle en profondeur. Donc il y a quand même des nouveautés qui sont acceptables, qui sont même souhaitables.
Oui, je crois que c'est un peu compliqué parce que, d'une part, je ne dis pas que Spinoza refuse la nouveauté thématiquement. Il n'y a aucun texte, lui, où il dit qu'il ne faut se méfier de nouveauté. Enfin, encore que. Mais je constate que quand il parle d'État, de la structure d'un État, jamais, peut-être même dans le cas de Moïse, il ne s'interroge sur la façon dont l'État a été fondé. Son interrogation, c'est toujours l'interrogation inverse, c'est-à-dire la façon dont l'État a dégénéré. Ce qui l'intéresse dans l'État des Hébreux, finalement, c'est la façon dont, dès le début, il est en train de dégénérer, puisqu'après l'épisode Veau d'Or, Moïse met dans la constitution de cet État l'erreur, c'est-à-dire le rôle des Lévites, au lieu que ce soit les princes de chaque tribu qui soient les prêtres. Dès le début, il y a dans l'État des Hébreux quelque chose qui va amener une série de dégradations successives. La dernière dégradation étant le Second Empire des Hébreux. Quand il parle de l'État néerlandais, enfin les Provinces-Unies, finalement, il ne se demande pas comment les Provinces-Unies ont été constituées. Il dit
comme elles étaient mal constituées dans le traité politique, elles étaient mal constituées, le peuple ne savait pas quelle était la structure de l'État, et c'est pour ça qu'il s'est effondré quand les Français ont fait la guerre. Autrement dit, il est beaucoup plus intéressé à montrer la destruction d'une constitution existante qu'à expliquer comment se constitue une nouvelle constitution. Quand il doit parler de nouvelle constitution, c'est soit en simplement tirant argument du texte biblique, Moïse a fondé l'État des Hébreux, soit en parlant des trois États types du traité politique, mais jamais il ne dit comment il faudra les instituer. La question de la transition, il ne la pose jamais.
Donc c'est une nouveauté à partir d'une constitution qui est déjà établie et qu'on n'interroge pas finalement.
Finalement, non.
Abbiamo il tempo.
Grazie. Una domanda per Pierre-François, pas un peu bizarre, mais tu as parlé justement de la curiosité in Spinoza, donc surtout négative, seulement une occurrence positive et tout ça. Mais quand tu as fait ton exposé très très intéressant, je pensais à le mot tolérance, qui n'est presque jamais dans les traités théologico-politiques, mais bien traverse la pensée de Spinoza. Donc ma question est, par analogie, de te pousser un peu à te demander, je n'ai aucun exemple à l'esprit à cette heure-là, mais si le terme de curiositas peut être plutôt une attitude interne, une espèce d'attitude épistémologique qu'il n'est à vous pas, mais qui est dans le pensée même métaphysique surtout, disons, de Spinoza. C'est ça un peu la question.
Merci, c'est un peu sur le même sujet. En fait, si, je veux dire, si la recherche de termes, si suivre un terme, par exemple, curiositas, c'est professeur Moreau, là, sur Spinoza, la recherche d'un terme curiositas, c'est pas un peu trompeur parce que je pensais à l'appendice, première partie de l'éthique, quand le pire qui puisse arriver, c'est quand si tu vois quelque chose d'extraordinaire et tu dis seulement c'est Dieu qui l'a fait et tu restes là dans cette admiration, mais le mieux à faire, c'est d'être curieux et de continuer à chercher, et même sans dire le mot curiositas ou curiosus dans le latin, nous peut-on comprendre ça comme curiosité, comme être quelque chose de positif?
Oui, je comprends bien, on ne peut pas se limiter à une analyse lexicale, tu as raison, mais il me semble que précisément Spinoza a toujours ce mouvement de recul devant la curiosité, même en dehors du domaine lexical. Dans l'appendice de la première partie de l'éthique, au fond, qu'est-ce qu'il décrit? Il décrit les gens qui, lorsqu'ils voient un phénomène qui leur est utile, se demandent curieusement à qui il sert, pour qui il a fait pour eux. C'est-à-dire, au fond, il n'énumère pas des questions qui seraient utiles, il énumère des questions qui sont inutiles et trompeuses. Les gens se demandent, puisque je vois des fruits sur un arbre, qui les a fait pour moi? C'est certainement Dieu, etc. Autrement dit, les causes finales, l'interrogation sur la cause finale, c'est l'exemple même de la curiosité inutile et même nuisible. Et de même, quand il parle quand il parle de ce qui est l'essentiel de l'éthique, emmener le lecteur vers la béatitude, il dit qu'à partir de ce qu'il a démontré dans la première partie, il pourrait énoncer un grand nombre de conséquences, mais qu'il va se contenter de nous emmener comme par la main vers la béatitude. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a toujours chez lui un geste de rejet de ce qui nous détournerait de notre... Autrement dit, il y a quand même chez lui une attitude fondamentale, je crois, qui est que face à un certain nombre de questions, un certain nombre de questions et d'objections, c'est satis superque, ça suffit comme ça, elles sont inutiles, ça nous emmène trop loin. Et pour reprendre les questions sur la libertà sui fondi, il est prêt à défendre la libertà sui fondi, mais lui, il ne la pratique pas, en quelque sorte. Il n'est pas prêt à discuter sur n'importe quel sujet. Dire, après tout, on voit la correspondance avec Blienberg, avec eux au Boxel. Il discute avec eux pendant 2-3 lettres, et puis d'un moment, il dit « Mais non, j'ai plus rien à vous dire. C'est pas la peine de discuter ce que... » On est trop loin l'un de l'autre, ça n'a plus d'intérêt de continuer la discussion. Je crois que peut-être plus que d'autres philosophes, il est sensible au fait qu'il y a un moment où la discussion s'arrête. On n'a plus rien à se dire. Et par rapport à ta question, je ne suis pas sûr d'avoir saisi ce que tu voulais dire, Louisa. Ou j'ai oublié entre-temps. Oui. Oui. Il y a l'idée. Oui. Et là, il me semble qu'il j'aurais aussi tendance à... Quand on regarde la correspondance de Spinoza avec Boyle, par l'intermédiaire de Oldenburg, on a quand même l'impression de deux études fondamentalement différentes. Boyle essaie, par des expérimentations, de démontrer un certain nombre de choses. Et la réponse de Spinoza, c'est qu'au fond, sur ce sujet-là, l'expérimentation, on n'avait pas besoin. Et qu'on pouvait le savoir par ces thèses générales sur la nature. Je crois que, je n'ai pas le temps d'en parler là, mais l'attitude de Boyle et celle de Spinoza à l'égard de l'expérimentation, ça renvoie à deux attitudes fondamentalement différentes. L'attitude de Boyle, effectivement, c'est peut-être une attitude de curiosité. Celle de Spinoza, c'est qu'on peut savoir des choses par les lois générales, et l'expérimentation, elle sert simplement à trancher entre deux lois générales. Tu vois ce que je veux dire? Même si c'est la même expérience, elle n'a pas la même fonction.
E io dovrei concludere, ma credo che sia praticamente impossibile, comunque non sarei in grado, e mi limito soltanto a dirvi che, come avete sentito dal Presidente del Centro Linceo, c'è l'idea di raccogliere gli atti di questo convegno nella collezione del Centro Linceo, quindi io vi scriverò presto per darvi le istruzioni necessarie per la redazione dei vostri articoli. Io penso che possiamo darci come deadline, se siete d'accordo, il mese di aprile, prossimo aprile. È ok? Prossimo aprile, per raccogliere i testi che poi verranno pubblicati. Naturalmente ringrazio tutti i relatori, tutti quelli che hanno partecipato a queste discussioni, che sono intervenuti, che hanno ascoltato, e credo che sia stato un convegno quantomeno interessante. Grazie ancora.